doubleheader here coming up after Jim. And I really think y'all should read the book, The Lentil Underground. It has a double meaning. This is a book about farmers who basically they call themselves biological farmers as opposed to industrial farmers. And when they got started and started questioning the industrial farm system, they were an underground movement. It wasn't part of the culture to challenge the industrial complex that controls agriculture. And so Liz Carlisle wrote a book about it. She's from Missoula, Montana. She's a PhD that now teaches in the School of Earth, Energy, and Environment at Stanford University. And I think what is beautiful about this book is the unfolding of the story. And not only is Liz here, but the main character in her book is here, David Oien, who started Timeless Seeds. He's a revolutionary. He's a revolutionary because he changed the way farmers think in Montana. He brought respect to carbon farming, to farming that recognizes that soil needs to be nurtured, that we are part of the web of life, that microbiota is essential to clean, healthy food and healthy creatures that inhabit the planet. I'm just going to give you one quote from the book that was meaningful to me, and then I'll ask Liz and David to come up here. So long as farmers operate within a cheap food economy that externalizes social and environmental costs, both farmers and eaters will be forced into the false choice between a healthy environment and their own bottom line. And these folks both have captured the bottom line, Liz, in this book, and Dave is living the bottom line. And tomorrow we're going to eat his black baby beluga lentils, so please welcome them warmly, all the way from Montana and Stanford. Liz and David, where are you?
Thank you so much for that very warm introduction, Jay, and for the invitation to be here. Thanks to all of you. It's exciting to be part of this convening, and I wanted to particularly thank everybody who's been at both of these mics, this one and also the one over there to my left, this evening, not only for your remarks, which are a challenge and an inspiration, but also for your work. We've heard from a number of stalwarts who've really been at this for some time, and I just so appreciate it. This is challenging work, and I think I'm just very much inspired by the way you have kept it going through all these different ups and downs in national politics and, you know, our knowledge of climate change and various kinds of ecological problems, to just keep this work going and do such smart, inspiring, heartfelt organizing. I just really, really appreciate it. So, yeah. Thank you, Jim and Ronnie and Carolyn, and everybody we're going to hear from this evening and tomorrow. On the plane over here, the woman next to me asked me what I do for a living. And I kind of grinned at her and said, I'm a lentil evangelist. And she wasn't sure whether that was what I just wrote down on my tax form or whether I was pulling her leg. But I think we just can't do enough to tell these stories, the stories of this grassroots response to the crisis of input-dependent agriculture, of industrial agriculture, because there is such an inspiring grassroots response, and we know how to do this. There is organic agriculture happening right now in the world in all of these wonderful ways, and I was inspired to learn about how it's happening in my home state. So for much of the past 5 years, I have been talking about this story that I've been calling the Lentil Underground, of a group of farmers who have innovated a farming model and a business model that require neither synthetic fertilizer nor synthetic herbicides, the things that my students are routinely told are necessary. They're not necessary. Farmers who produce good food and good livelihoods without undermining human and environmental health. So this is the story I'm really passionate about. I'm glad that Jim set us up here with much of the context, but just to quickly recap, what is this crisis of industrial agriculture that we need a grassroots response to? We know it's an environmental crisis. This is kind of one of the headlines of that environmental crisis, climate change, because it has this huge time limit on it for us as a species, but of course, all of the other things that Jim mentioned too, some of which might be affecting us or our communities right now, in addition to climate change. It's also, it's a hunger crisis. And this for me is really painful because the excuse that's often given for the need for this input-dependent agriculture, right, is to feed the world and solve the hunger crisis. But, that approach has had multiple decades to do that and clearly hasn't been very successful. So our input-dependent agriculture is also part of our global food security crisis. This is just the numbers on people who don't have enough calories, but there's also many people who don't have the right calories. So if you start getting into micronutrient deficiency or uncertainty about where the next meal is coming from, these numbers go way up. And of course, it's a health crisis, so this has been mentioned. The chronic disease burden that comes from this input-dependent agricultural system, obesity, diabetes. So this is not a system that's working. So yes, we need to have this grassroots response. And what does this grassroots response need to look like? What do we do about this, right? That's what we're here to talk about. And I really think that the answer is we need to design our farming and food systems so that they thrive without these inputs, right? We need to design those kinds of food systems. And those are going to be different regionally. These are regional sustainable food systems that are appropriate to their ecology, which we can understand, as Jim has so beautifully stated, if we're in connection with that ecology. And a really big part of this regional approach to sustainable food systems, I think one of the really critical things that I learned from these farmers in Montana that I spoke with, is crop rotation. That was mentioned earlier today in response to Pesticides 101, that this is a critical part of a food system that is healthy, that is resilient, and that is not input dependent. So here's a picture of one of the farms featured in this book, one of the farms that I visited, one of the farms that sells their pulse crops through Timeless Natural Food that you'll hear from about David. And this is, it looks like a garden map, but this is actually a 2,000 acre farm. This is one of their fields. They farm in strips and they rotate through something like 24 different crops, about a decade-long rotation. And I think this is really, Melinda was talking earlier about, the term innovative, and we've been talking about reclaiming our language. I think this is about the most innovative we get in farming. This is the direction of innovation, I think, is how can you design these complex rotations that meet all these ecosystem service needs within the farm itself. So you don't have to think about how you're going to bring in fertility or bring in pest control. This is a farm that's designed to do those things, as well as provide a good living to these farmers, also to provide multiple options, right? If you've got 24 different crops in your rotation, if one of them has a bad year, you're not going to totally lose your shirt. So crop rotation, totally central to this whole story of how we're going to move beyond pesticides. And the critical thing in this Montana system that's moving beyond wheat monoculture, hopefully one farm at a time here, input-dependent wheat monoculture, is having a legume in there. So this is what lentils look like mid-season. They can grow in this semi-arid region that has short seasons, and they're providing that critical nitrogen fertility in the rotation. So yeah, you need a cover crop in the rotation for that fertility too. You'll hear more about this also from Dave. But you also, I think what's so brilliant about this is it's something that you can sell as a cash crop, typically for more than wheat, but it's also providing, the pest and disease cycle breaking up of having a different family in the rotation and that additional nitrogen fertility. So these little roots are doing all this great work with bacteria, little nitrogen factories in the soil. And as a result, this is a much more climate-friendly way to farm, not using all these synthetic nitrogen fertilizers. These are averages. This is an environmental working group graph that probably many of you have seen. And the reason that all those animal products are so high on this graph is that they're all getting fed these feed grains that need so much nitrogen fertilizer. It's a huge part of the climate footprint of our food system, is just these feed grains with all this nitrogen fertilizer on the feed grains. The conversion ratio of those calories into human food is lower because it's going through an animal. So it's a lot of nitrogen fertilizer at the end of the day, in addition to the methane emissions, which is what we tend to hear more about. So this is a really big part of getting off of this fossil fuel-based economy. One of the other big industrial inputs that we're relying on is building legumes back into our systems, including our wheat systems. But that's not the whole story. So before I turn the mic over to David, I want to talk a little bit about a paradigm shift, because I think this is at the heart of moving beyond pesticides. And I was chuckling a little bit when the fellow brought up, whatever happened to crop rotation earlier in the Pesticides 101 session, because I imagine that you, wherever you are not the only person thinking, this is not news, right? Frankie Moore LePay wrote Diet for a Small Planet in, I think it was 1971. Farmers have been rotating legumes with grains for at least 10,000 years. Some archaeological evidence suggests it was much earlier than that. And you are all, of course, right. We have the know-how to farm without agrochemicals. We know that agrochemicals are not necessary to feed the world. And in fact, there's a good case to be made that they are getting in the way of global food security. I think the food sovereignty framing has been particularly good at pointing that out. But ultimately, I think for this country, where agriculture is so tightly connected to the myth of manifest destiny and the project of conquest, moving beyond pesticides requires something deeper. It requires moving beyond a John Wayne mental model in our human relations as well as our ecological relations. So I'm going to read you a short, sort of a very brief little manifesto on that. And then you can hear the real story from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So, you can't do it alone. Much like a newly initiated legume farmer, I want to think that lentils are a straightforward substitute for synthetic fertilizer, a cheaper, more environmentally benign alternative. To some extent, this is true. But if that was really all there was to it, there would be no lentil underground, just a smattering of savvy growers rationally applying plant-based nitrogen instead of expensive ammonium nitrate. But the fact is that biological fertility is more than just a different nutrient management approach. It's an entirely different way of life, one in which time and space broaden considerably, and the illusion of control falls apart. Building your soil biologically is not a precise prescription for a particular crop, but a contribution to a larger ecology, subject to independent variables, geologic time, and global biogeochemical cycles. You will not capture all the value on this farm in this year. You cannot individualize your return. To build biological fertility is to build community, to accept interdependence with other creatures, and foster a common benefit. This way of life cultivates a new kind of awareness, a new empathy. You have to pay attention beyond this homestead. You have to pay attention beyond this season. Planting organic lentils and all the other crops that go with them becomes part of who you are, what you are conscious of, how you see the world. It forces you to listen more deeply, more expansively. And it softens, to some extent, the borders of the self. This is the great irony of the lentil underground, or perhaps its secret. What rugged individualism brought together, only community can sustain. So to me, that is really the insight at the heart of the lentil underground. And I'm very pleased to hand the mic over to its renegade in chief, the founding farmer and CEO of Timeless Natural Food, David Oien.
Okay, thanks, Liz. It's really great to be here at this conference, and it's inspiring to see, even in just these 2 hours, the enthusiasm and the activism that's represented in this community here. Whether it's nationally, statewide, in your city, your neighborhood park, your own lawn, we really can make a difference. And it's what we do, it's what we do at home that has an effect that it's kind of like a ripple in the pool. And that, I think really that's kind of part of what's behind Liz's book, The Lentil Underground. Jim really hit so many points that I really don't need to say anything in lots of ways. But I will do, is kind of focus and maybe, if you can remember what he said and some of what Ronnie said, and in 101, some of these things, just reoccur. I'm going to talk about lentils because a lot of people don't know much about lentils. Anybody that's read the book knows that, the lentils in the book, they're really just kind of, a metaphor for a lot bigger story and a lot bigger picture. But in the end, a lot of people just kind of don't know about lentils. So, yep, sorry. Okay, yep, sorry about that. Okay, I'll try to stand still. Okay, so what we have, let's see, we have a message here saying my battery is running low. I wonder if we can plug this in somehow. Yep, not a problem. So, I'm a third-generation Montana farmer. My grandparents immigrated from Norway. They were farmers, and actually, the reason that they came to the United States, ironically, had to do with climate change, and that it was just at the tail end of the Little Ice Age, which was kind of 200 or 300 years, ended kind of mid-1850s. Europe was starving because the climate was cooling dramatically. And anybody that's been to Scandinavia knows that their soils are very rocky, tend not to be very productive. My family was going hungry. My grandparents on one side survived one winter by eating the screenings from the local flour mill. And so anyway, they came to the United States, farmed with horses. The prairies were plowed with steam engines, but basically they were kind of biological farmers in lots of ways. My parents got married in 1930 and started farming shortly thereafter. They were kind of on the cusp of the change from biological agriculture to what these days we call industrial agriculture. Just before my dad bought the farm that I was raised on and currently live on, he took his team of horses to the local tractor dealership and traded them in on a fossil fuel tractor. I mean, it was quite literally, horses went in one door, a tractor went out the other door. And that was really kind of, one of the major, points of transition I guess, in agriculture. That happened in the early 40s. And of course, after World War II, is when we really got into the industrial phase of agriculture with the introduction of off-farm inputs, a lot higher fossil fuel inputs, and pesticides, and herbicides that were kind of consequences of the war machine. What do you do with all this chemical industry that was developed? Well, one of the things you could do is sell stuff to farmers. Okay, and my dad was part of that generation. So I moved back to the farm in 1976 after college and knocking around the world a little bit, after doing some of the things that I think you were also involved in, maybe in the 70s. Well, maybe not. I don't know. But probably. Anyway, so I moved back to the farm in 1976, and what I came back to was a crisis. There's a crisis. There's a fossil fuel crisis. There was an oil embargo in the early 70s. Fossil fuel skyrocketed. Price of gasoline went from 35 cents a gallon to 48 cents a gallon in a matter of months. But it had a major economic impact on farms. And we were losing farmers. There was a farm crisis. Farmers all across the country are going out of business, and some of them are committing suicide. But also coming back to the family farm, I discovered that there was a chemical crisis in that literally every acre of every farm was hit with herbicides, primarily in our area, sometimes pesticides, every acre, every year on every farm. And a consequence of that was a health crisis in our local community. Many of the people of my father's generation were dying of a cancer called non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which eventually was directly connected to the overexposure of 2,4-D. Sort of ironic that, you know, in the 2000 or the 1001 primer earlier, 2,4-D is now back on the landscape again as an admixture to to Roundup, to glyphosate. But anyway, that's what I came back to. You know, you talk about connecting the dots. I was like, wait a minute, what's going on here? You know, there's a French poet that had the saying, "The future's not what it used to be," and that's pretty much, you know, kind of what it occurred to me. It's like the future cannot be what it used to be. We have to move on. So the story of the Lennon Underground, and basically the story of my life the past 30, 35 years has to do with what do we do about that future? You know, how do we create that future in a little different scenario? So here's where I'm from. I moved back to that family farm in north central Montana. Ooh, where do I point this thing? Oh, you're so great. Thanks. Yeah. Okay. So Conrad is located in the northern Great Plains within an area of the state that's called the Golden Triangle. It's called the Golden Triangle because that is kind of the major wheat production area in the state of Montana. And the other thing I discovered, when I came back was that, wheat was king in Montana. Had been for, at least a decade before I moved back, and still to a large extent is, in that it was the crop that was grown on virtually every single acre of cultivated ground in Montana, kind of the eastern 3/4 of the state, and it was grown year after year. So we had monocrop wheat and monoculture across the landscape. But the Golden Triangle there gets its name from the wheat production. Is there a button here I can just push?
Oh, this is why.
Can I just go here?
Okay. It should go now. It just keeps giving you
Okay. These were the farmers in the Lennon Underground farm, kind of basically the extended area of the Golden Triangle. The book was written, 5 or 6 years ago, I guess, now maybe, or published 2 years ago, but yeah, research 5 or 6 years ago. We now work with about 30 farmers across, certified organic family farmers across the state. This is kind of what they look like. Just regular folks, with dogs, with kids. Some of them, are old timers. I've been farming for many years. Some are kids moving back to the family farm. Some are not moving back to the family farm. The couple in the middle there, Doug and Anna Crabtree, are the owners of the farm that Liz showed the field map of. In fact, what they are now doing is they're taking apprentices in a 3-year apprentice program whereby young people primarily, today it's been young people come to the farm, learn about their farming system, learn about organic farming, learn about organic markets. And Doug and Anna's hope is that after a period of 3 years, they will have sufficient training, sufficient know-how, and sufficient connections to actually go out and be organic farmers themselves. So it's not a short-term project. It's a 2 or 3 year project, but you end up with a farm basically at the end of that. And one of the big challenges, as Jim mentioned, going forward is just it's just continuing this legacy with new young farmers and expanding the amount of acres that are organic. This is the kind of landscape that we farm out there. It's the northern Great Plains, so it's treeless, it's gently rolling, and it's semi-arid, meaning that our annual rainfall is between 10 and 14 inches annual, between total snow and rainfall. I've been here for about a week. My kids actually, all my children live here in the Twin Cities area. And in the past 3 or 4 days, I think it rained like 2 inches or something like that. That's more than we get in most months. But anyway, it's challenging. It's a challenging place to farm in many ways. And these farms that we work with, they are mechanically based. The ground is cultivated mechanically, seeded mechanically, harvested mechanically. It's not garden plots, it's not small orchards, it's broad-scale agriculture. Most of the farms out there, the organic farms range from 800 to 2,000 or 3,000 acres would be a very typical size of an organic farm, kind of an economic unit these days. But there are farmers that are 10,000 acres, certified organic farmers that are 10,000 acres. And you talk about, impact on the landscape. How many orchards, how many truck farms would it take to comprise 10,000 acres? And some of our farms are farming that land without pesticides and with regenerative practices in the 5,000 to 10,000 acre scale. Okay, so for the rest of the time, I just want to focus really particularly on lentils and ask some questions. Why would people want to grow them to start with? Why would a cook want to cook with them? Why should you be eating them? And why do you want to do it now? Okay, going to take a quick poll. How many people are lentil eaters in here? All right. You know what? I had the opportunity to travel with Liz. She was kind enough to invite me to travel on her book release tour, and we traveled all over the country. And there weren't too many auditoriums where this many people, this percentage, raised their hand. Okay, so I don't know if it's the co-ops here in the state, in Minneapolis, or just the kind of folks you are. But anyway, we'll look at this. So this is what lentils look like. Kind of mid-season. There they are in their pods. But this is really why farmers want to grow them, and that is that there's this miracle of nature where a symbiotic relationship between rhizobia bacteria who live in the soil infect the roots this family of plants called legumes, lentils being one of them. And they get these big knobs on them, and they have the ability, the bacteria have the ability to capture nitrogen out of the air, which is, mixed in the soil, and provide it for the plant. And it's very few plants that can do that. Wheat, barley, corn, cannot do that. They need nitrogen, and that's part of the reason for the kind of the development of the synthetic nitrogen industry, was to provide nitrogen for crops that can't do that. In our country, it was primarily wheat, but flax and quinoa, and lots of most plants cannot make their own nitrogen. Legumes, in combination with this infection by rhizobia bacteria, can actually capture that, produce enough nitrogen for their own production, and also leave some for the following crop. The other thing about lentils that work in our country is that they are drought tolerant. They're very frost hardy. 30 degrees doesn't bother lentils. Don't worry about it. In fact, you could use these in your orchard as a cover crop, and you'd be fine. They're also shallow rooted versus cereal grain. So, in areas that don't have a lot of rainfall, our number one limiting resource is really water. So part of the beauty of these lentils is that they have a shallow rooting system, whereas wheat has a deeper rooting system. So even though lentils, maybe rob moisture, if you will, take moisture from the top part of the soil, it leaves some for wheat for the following crop for the following year. For better or worse, they're very short in stature, kind of grow 12 to 16 inches tall, and it's a dry land crop. They don't even like too much water. Susceptible to root rot if they, under irrigation. Probably wouldn't work here in Minnesota, where you have about a 3,000 or a 30 inch rainfall per year. They're also short season annual, about 100 days from planting to harvest, which is something that also works in our environment. We plant one crop a year, seed typically in March or April, and harvest in July or August. That's what the ripe lentil crop looks like. This is lentil crop just starting to bloom, so it's 6 or 8 weeks after emergence. But you can see it's knee high if you're kneeling down in the ground, and it doesn't get much taller than that. What lentils offer in this typically wheat monoculture farming system was biodiversity, in the cereal grain rotations. So that's kind of what wheat looks like at harvest. And lentils they're just a much different crop. They offer a whole different, kind of microenvironment for all the biota that exists. Lentils also break the pest cycles in a cereal grain monoculture. That's what a wheat crop looks like. That's what a lentil plant looks like. And you can see the morphology is much different. That also means actually that the pests that infect one are much different than the pest that infects the other. So doing a crop rotation basically breaks those pest and disease cycles and reduces or eliminates the need for the pesticides that we're all concerned about. It also offers grade ground shading versus cultivated fallow, which was a typical management system when I moved back to the farm. We have so much or so little rainfall that when I moved back to the farm, it was kind of a crop fallow system. 1 year in any given field would be wheat or barley. The next year would just be cultivated fallow. And as you'll learn if you come to the soil health workshop tomorrow, cultivation can be very damaging to the soil. Well, if you grow a green crop there, it's capturing rather than the fallow, it's capturing the carbon out of the air. It's providing shade for the ground, reducing or preventing soil erosion. So it's a great rotational crop for wheat. It also builds organic matter and biological activity both above and underground. For the farmers, it's a high-value crop. most farmers can make more money growing lentils or other legume crops than they can wheat. One of the real problems with commodity production in the conventional system is that the vast majority of our wheat is exported to the Pacific Rim or other places overseas. So there's this huge kind of hills and valleys price cycle that really has a major impact on farmers. And even conventional farmers now are growing lentils and peas, chickpeas, the other legume crops suited to our area. And they're finding that rather than having the ground fallow that second year or intervening year, either cultivated fallow or no-till chem fallow, you can grow these legume crops and actually have a cash crop that intervening year, maybe 2 years out of 3, something like that. Still might be necessary to go back to fallow or advantageous to go to fallow or a cover crop, but it's actually very beneficial for farmers to do these crop rotations, very, very beneficial to them financially. Okay, in the kitchen, why do you want to cook with them? Well, they cook in 5 minutes to 30 minutes, so it doesn't take much energy to cook them, but it's also very quick, for current lifestyle. Unlike the dry beans, like pinto beans or black beans, you don't have to soak them. It's a very versatile ingredient, can be used as appetizers, soup, salads, all the way to desserts. It was one of the first crops that were domesticated, so there's a 10,000-year culinary history, and literally across the planet, lentils tend to be part of the culinary history. They came to the United States actually very late. We've only been growing them here in the United States for probably maybe 60 or 70 years total. Initially started in the Palouse country out in kind of the border between Washington and Idaho. Moved into Montana in the kind of mid-'80s, I guess we started growing them. Really kind of got legs in the 90s, and now North Dakota, to some degree South Dakota, are also growing lentils. Montana has become, in the last decade, Montana has become the #1 lentil producer in the nation, and also the #1 organic lentil producer in the nation. Okay, so why do you want to eat them? Well, there's no reason not to eat them. They're very high in protein, no cholesterol. It's a great alternative to meat. Dietary fiber, folates. If you're pregnant or concerned about about brain development, folates are very important. Loaded with minerals. Very low glycemic index if you're diabetic or any of your family is diabetic. One of the lowest foods with a glycemic index. Gluten-free, obviously, because it's not related to wheat at all. They're non-GMOs. Interestingly, the entire lentil industry, even the conventional lentil industry, is fighting the development of GMO for lentils, peas, and chickpeas. And the reason for that is they know the market. They know where the market's going. They're also high in antioxidants. Okay, so name me an antioxidant high food. Blueberries, right? Okay, well, fresh basil. Those of you who have gardens, remember that? Oh yeah. Well, then there's lentils, right? The hidden secret. But they are one of the highest antioxidant foods that there are. Liz showed a variation of this slide as well. Why do you want to do it now? Because just as climate change impacted my grandparents, climate change is going to impact, my kids and my grandkids. And lentils is down on the bottom. They fix their own nitrogen, so they don't need the input of synthetic nitrogen, which is one of the highest carbon producers in the agricultural production system. They don't need much water, so you don't have to put fossil fuel into pumping water. They're quick to cook. Once they get to your kitchen, Okay, so we're on a university campus. We're going to do a quick little quiz here. Okay, the annual consumption per capita for lentils. Okay, now, I don't know how good you guys are going to be at this because so many of you eat lentils. But we'll see how smart you are. Meat, okay, there's a little quiz here, a little help. How many pounds of meat per person per year? 150. Not too bad. 190 pounds per person per year in the U.S. Okay. Another clue. Okay, wheat in the form of hamburger buns that you did not eat at McDonald's. Bread, pancakes, whatever. That's 170 pounds. Okay. Okay. The money question. Okay. No, it's 10. No, it's 10 ounces. 10 ounces. Oh, you were thinking 10 pounds. No. Okay. Okay. So, in front of our timeless seeds and lentil bags, it's a pound. So that much is the annual consumption per person per year in the U.S. Okay.
It's a growth market.
What's that? It's a growth market. It's an opportunity. Right. That's an opportunity to get a lot more healthy. So anyway.
What's the international figure for that?
That's obviously going to depend country by country. I don't really know. In India, I think it's something like 30 to 40 pounds, something like that. The good news is that when we started this company, Timeless Seeds, in 1985, it was 3 ounces per person per year, right? And now we're up to 10. I don't think it has anything to do with us. It's just sort of what happened. Although during some of these Lead Underground presentations around the country, as often as not, somebody would come up afterwards, somebody from India or maybe from the Middle East, and said, the reason you went from 3 to 10 ounces is the fact that we moved here. Right? It's not you're eating more, it's that we moved here. So immigration is good. Okay, as you may or may not know, last year the United Nations declared as the International Year of the Pulses, and pulses are lentils, dried peas, chickpeas, and beans, this whole class of edible legumes that come in a pod. They were done, UN designated that, for all the reasons, the sustainability reasons, the health reasons, the low moisture requirement reasons. You can look up these websites. Lots of great recipes, lots of great reasons for eating lentils and the other crops. That's our website, timelessfood.com. There's some more pictures, some stories, some recipes on there as well. Okay.